Let's take a look at Versailles 1919. This is Mark Herman's, what is it called? Great Statesman series? Yeah. Not really a series so far. Like, if you think about, when you're thinking about like series games like Coin or something like that, they tend to be very, very similar. So far, out of the three of these I've faced, each one's different, and significantly so. Yes, some of the Coin games have some significant like chrome added onto the original, but like Churchill, hey, I liked Churchill enough after playing it that I was like, oh, this is a cool, neat new idea. I want to explore it some more. I got, I don't remember, Pericles, I think it was. It was Peloponnesian War based on it. Played that and also picked it up. Maybe picked it up before I played it. But that didn't stick as happily in my stomach. It used many of the same mechanisms from Churchill, but felt less like that kind of statesmanship thing. It was basically a four-player game with two players on each side who are competing with each other as well as on the massive board. Whereas Churchill, everybody was on the same side, the victors, well, the United Nations, as it were, trying to, ensure that the peace came out the way they want it. Which is very, very different from if it is Pericles. It's hard for me to tell because I know there's two games called Pericles, one of which I have up here, which is not it, and the other one up with my more wargame-ish type stuff. That Pericles is purely a Euro, and I think it was from the Great Statesman series, but anyway. This one's very different. It doesn't have that Churchill kind of mechanism going on in it. It feels more stripped down. You're not maneuvering your armies around on the board trying to achieve objectives that you'll be able to enforce as a peace. Now the thing with Churchill is, honestly, a lot of it happened during the war, right? There was a lot of negotiations during the war. I don't think there really was in World War I as to what the eventual outcome would be. And two, success was not guaranteed. It was, right before the end of the war, the Germans launched a massive offensive, which could have won them the war, conceivably, in a way that just didn't happen in World War II. So, yes, in Churchill you can't lose the war, but you kind of can. You could fail to take Germany. In this, that's just not in play. What you have instead is the negotiations that happened after the German collapse and essentially the armistice. Anyway, enough of that. Let's take a look at... I played this once because it is such a weird setup. I played the basic game. The additional versions of it for the normal number of players, it holds 3 or 4 players under the normal rules, are both the same game. Well, they're all the same game, but it's just how long the game is going to be. And that's determined. There's a game end card that's in here. In the basic game, it'll be the 21st card from the bottom of this deck. The setup would be the same. Oh, I forgot to do some things. Let's get these here. Okay, and this is a card. Isn't that cool? I actually really like the graphics in this game in a lot of ways. But okay. So component-wise, you have issues that are being brought to, well, okay, sure. Issues that are being brought to the conference. And that's a big deck, these nice tarot-sized cards. I actually really like the way they work for this. You could probably get away with something smaller, but I'm so impressed with these for whatever reason. Like I said, component-wise, this was great. And my first thought was, let's see who did the art side of things. Well, it's McGowan, but reading the designer's notes, I don't think he was all that involved in the design of the board and components. Not in here. One of the designers is Jeff Engelstein, who has a podcast. I hadn't heard of it, but it must be a pretty big one, given I'm just so out of things right now. But also Donald Haggerty, was very instrumental in actually getting the artistic side of it more fleshed out. All in all, though, I think that component-wise, this one's really pretty. I know, you're looking at it and saying it's a euro. I know you. Okay, but there's also a lot of information being contained here and a lot of reminders here. Okay, so you have the issues, which are the primary thing that are going to generate your victory points. They have a victory point value on them here, a number of different options for how they're going to be solved, and then they sit in different locations. And those different locations on the table, these are ones that can be resolved at any point, as long as someone has influence on them, is winning the issue. Up here in the waiting room, these are ones that you know are coming, and you can push your influence into them, but you can't resolve them, right? They have to make their way onto the table. And then over here you have a discard pile. You see there's a discard already. That's because you're going to be able to pull things out of the discard pile if you want them to go into the waiting room at various times. And then of course you have the deck, again constructed. In this case I've got 10 cards on the bottom. These are the various different versions of the game. You can go with 20 cards on the bottom. That's the base game. I did that. I've got some worries about going with more. It can go down to, you don't know how many cards are on the bottom, because you take the bottom 5 cards and shuffle the endgame card into it. I actually really am afraid of that one, because I think there's a nice mechanism of trying to delay the finish that I didn't want to get rid of. Now, of course, you could just put 5 cards on the bottom and a card on top, but I really like, I really don't think the game will hold up as well with the 10 card, with the 5 card thing. The thing that worries me about 10 cards on the bottom instead of 20 is, and maybe I should have gone with 15, is that the game felt about right at 20 cards in terms of the amount of time played. It felt like the game wasn't lasting too long. Maybe 15 would be fine. I wanted to push it a little bit. I'm worried it's going to feel like it stayed around too long. I'm also kind of worried about the impacts on happiness, although they do modify the amount of happiness you have and stuff like that. But the 20 card game meant that a lot of issues that historically were important didn't get any consideration at all, even getting into the discard pile. On the other hand, I do think it's cool to have some cards that just never make it out. And I feel like the 10 is a good option. The next thing you have is the event cards. And similar to the issues, the event cards, one event is going to be placed on the table, and when an issue is resolved, that event will have this effect. 2 events are in here, which is, I don't know, they say crisis, but it's basically like it is part of the waiting room. These are issues, or these are events that are available, and they're going to be able to be promoted just like the issues are going to be able to be promoted from the waiting room. Now, the mechanism for determining new issues is a little bit funky. You're able to pull from the discard pile at a cost of influence, 0 for the top card, 1 or 2 for the next 2 cards down, or take the top 2 issues, choose one, discard the other. If you don't like, it's a nice mechanism that allows you a lot of flexibility in terms of what things you want to promote into the waiting room. The event deck doesn't work that way, though, because events happen, right? But they kind of sit out here until somebody promotes them into on-the-table events, right? And if they have this little black mark on them, that means that when you promote it from here to here, you have the opportunity to take one of your available cubes and put it on there in order to claim the right to manipulate that event's capability. So for example, whoever owns this, whoever has the cube on this one would be able to add or remove one unrest from the Middle East. Great. If nobody has the cube on there, whoever's turn it is when the issue is being resolved gets to activate it for that. Most of the ones that have, well, the ones that have any choice to them have this opportunity to be the guy who controls that event when it comes up, which can be very powerful. Or it can be a waste of a cube in some cases. Again, you have some graphics here to talk about the different things that I've already mentioned as to how all the cards and everything move. Here they've got the specification of being able to put the cube there, etc. Let's keep looking. All right, players have a handful of 3 military units, these circles, and I think 15 cubes. Because this is GMT and they like to give you a couple of spares, make sure you count out properly. You got one extra of each. Also, there was I don't know what to call it, errata cards that were fixed that came in my version. These the player aid cards, these, a couple of the issues, or one of those, a couple of the issues are in there. Pretty minor changes on them. I looked at one and didn't see the change on it, and now I know what it is. I was able to find it, but it looked about the same. It was certainly playable if you didn't have it. These are your influence cubes. You're going to be using these on issues in order to bid for the issues at various times in the game. A lot of the game. Your military circles are generally used in locations on this part of the board, which is pretty, you know, instead of having a map that you move military on, you just deploy them to specific regions. But you can only deploy in these areas, and some of them come with a cost, but they also have different advantages depending on where you are and different capabilities in the game. Why don't we talk about that chart for a little bit? This is the unrest, well, it's called the region track, but you're going to be tracking unrest on here, and as unrest goes up, there's a possibility for a random, well, these cards will trigger unrest checks, and the further to the right that the unrest marker is, the more likely, well, the more likely that unrest will happen, to the point where a 1 or more on a die roll will get you unrest, but over here it's impossible. Now, how does the unrest get triggered in general? It gets triggered by these things. Now you see this. For example, remove 1 powder keg from a random region. Whenever a card is drawn from here and put here, the current active player takes that action. Now that action is generally not under that player's control. I don't think any of them are, but I'm just saying generally to cover my ass or whatever. My ass needs covering because these pants have a fucking hole in them. Let me swap batteries and I'll keep going. For those of you who are wondering, I'm playing Nations in Arms, right, or I have been, and I'm taking a little break from that. I will get back to the 1805 campaign. I really wanted to do something else. I like to break things up. I haven't been doing that much. I think it's a good idea. Okay, let's get over here. What else is there on the board? We have a happiness track. Various events here cause various issues cause unhappy events too. Unhappiness or happiness, and that allows you to increase or decrease. Also, you're going to find that utilizing your military can cause unhappiness. Demobilizing your military can get you happiness back. And has an important facet as well, in that if you drop into a different color zone, you're not allowed to have all your military in existence anymore. You're forced to demobilize them. Okay. The way the demobilization works is over here. The first person to put a military in here will get 5 happiness. The next one gets 4. In the 4-player game, you have these 2 spots as well. This spot is always there. This is also where you go if you drop below one of these. I think you get the point for it, but not very helpful, you know, if these are open, right? But only 1 military can go in each box. If you make it down here, you're stuck there, and you've got a big penalty towards the end of the game. An important little trigger point here: Japan and Italy will refuse to sign the Treaty of Versailles if they drop below the 15 point. Now, I think that's the case even if Italy is a player, but they can still negotiate the treaty. They're just not allowed to sign it. That's important for some victory point aspects and not a lot else. The exhausted influence in military. When you use a military, and we'll get to this, during a, what is the word? During an unrest situation. I don't know what it is. You're going to, if you use the military to bid for that, it goes into here. If you might have other reasons you end up exhausting military as well. And whenever you use influence, it might go into here. There's mechanisms in play, but basically, if you put influence on an issue and you win the issue, you're going to have to pay that influence there. If you don't win the issue, there are various things that reduce the amount of influence that get exhausted. Now, you're going to be able to get those back through a particular mechanism as well. There's a player aid card, which I completely ignored, being me, but it appears very, very helpful. I just had the rules open the whole time. There's a scoring pad here, which is a nice little addition to the game. I don't know if you actually need this, or you certainly needed one piece of it, right? I don't know if you actually need to record everything on the paper. I did, and then erased it. Had a very, very close game in my first game for 3 of the 4 players. The US ended up completely crapped out. And by the way, the nations, US, Britain, France, and Italy. Italy should be green to me. I don't know why. Just because so many games have Italy as green. What are these? All right, when the first unrest happens, the players each are forced to choose one of these general strategy cards. And these give you additional victory points. So these are kind of your variable victory conditions at the end of the game. And they each have 4 sets of things for victory points, and they have various different effects. Some of them are going to be based on... there's a solo game. I'll talk about that in a moment. Some of them are going to be based on these symbols here. And each of those symbols that is on an issue will generate the points for that. This is something different. It's regions that are at a certain level of unrest. In this case, less than or equal to 3 give you victory points. This one is going to be for each of the Italian or Japanese who don't sign the treaty. You get a certain number of victory points. This one's a little funky. You're going to get victory points based on your happiness relative to everyone else, because happiness, like everything in this world, is a relative commodity. You know, if your nation is the happiest nation, you will get a larger number of victory points. If yours is the least happy nation, you won't. Okay, there is one that's really funky, and I had to go look this up to find out what the fuck it meant. This regional competition. It has this section here, control issues with different regions and then a star underneath it. The way to read this is however many regions you have issues in, you take the victory points that are below that. We're not going to see that in this game because I've already dealt those out. There's a big pile of these issues, and we're not seeing like isolationism here, which is one of the options, etc. And here's the thing. You're not forced into a national choice. However, some of them may be better for certain nations. Now, some of these counters have sort of a dual purpose. So, for example, naval markers and empire markers have a little flag on them. What's up with that? Okay. You will get victory points for those flags if you control the issue. So it's a way, say here, this is a 5-point issue, but if you're the British or the US and you take this marker, if it's your marker, you get an extra victory point on it, if you control that issue at the end of the game. Anyway, that's just a bit of weirdness there. Anyway, and the national happiness one, this bonus here, means that whatever points you were getting for national happiness, not your happiness itself, the amount of points that you get at the end of the game is doubled. So happiness is more important to you than it is to the other players, and then you start focusing more on it. These allow you to kind of direct your intentions a little bit more. The issues themselves have a lot in them too as to what you want to do with them. Like I said, there's a solo game. Haven't even looked at it. And then there's a game, for 2 players where I don't remember which players you play. I think it's Britain and France. The US and Italy are kind of played by a bot, and the rules are different for that. But I think Italy's played as a bot in the 3-player game as well, even though it doesn't use the full 2-player game. Or maybe not. No, I don't think so. I think they're just not a player at all. So, yeah. That's a quick look at the components, making sure, there's a few things here too. So these strength markers, this victory point marker, and these strategy markers, I don't think are necessary. Now the strategy markers could be used to do something like that, which could be helpful. And I'll put these up with the players to help remind me. You're going to end up with a large chain of these issues in front of you. I found that I was basically running out of table for these 3 players, just doing one chain of issues. So with a longer game, I'm going to see more issues out there. I may be a little tighter, maybe a little bit more confusing for me. But this table is certainly big enough to handle the 4-player game. So, definitely for the basic game, but even for this longer game, I'm going to be able to do it. I just had to create a little bit more space. All right, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the rules, but since I'm going to have to compile this video into multiple pieces, I am going to break so I can light a pipe, brew some more tea, and then we'll dig into the rules themselves. Personal notes, let's see. Let's get a little bit here. So, some of you are following things. I found out my dad is like on his very last legs. He's been in the ICU for like multiple months, and it looks like he's fading. I got an email a couple of days ago, but I didn't notice it till today. So there's that. And then I went shopping Tuesday and hurt myself and my cart trying to get it down my hill from the back area, and I don't seem to have done any real damage to myself. I did some repairable damage to my cart, but I have food for a while at least. So that's the fun stuff in my life. Anyway, we will get to we'll get to digging into the rules. Let me plug this in, and I'll be back down in a while. Okay, back to the rules for Versailles. By the way, the rule book itself, let's talk about this briefly. It's in general very good, and in fact, in one place I saw one of the best explanations I've seen of a certain type of diplomacy. We'll get to that when we hit it. But there are also a couple of things in it that were really problematic. One was that card I showed you. The card itself doesn't explain what's going on it, and the rules omitted any explanation of that particular victory point mechanism. I had to go. That was not. There was no recourse in the published game for this, and there's been no errata printed for this, and no other than the cards that needed replacing. And the rule book, the living rule book, is this one. It's not a later version, and there's no changes for that. So that was one issue. That card doesn't have an explanation of its special victory condition thing, whereas they go into some of these others that I felt were pretty easy to understand without having to refer to the rules. And then there was another section, another piece of the rules where the rule as written is just absolutely wrong. I was playing it not as the rule was written, the way it's meant to be as far as I can tell. But then when I look in the playbook, the example agreed with how I was playing it, not with how the rule is written. There was some dispute about that online, but again, it hasn't been revisited. A little disturbing. This is not a recent game. I mean, it's not like right away. It's 2020 here. So, yeah. I mean, it's been several years that it was left alone. The second printing or whatever came with those errata cards. I don't know if, I assume people who had the game originally got them as well in one way or another without having to, pay for some kind of update kit. But I'm not sure. Okay, let's take a look at the rules. Here we go over the components and whatnot the way we did. The setup is largely mechanistic. No big deal there. One thing I didn't talk about too much was these powder kegs versus rebellion counters. The rebellion counter is how hot the area is. The powder keg is the minimum level. Okay, so right now, so the unrest level can never be on or to the left of the powder keg. So if the powder keg moves forward, it pushes the unrest higher. There's another side to that, which is military units prevent the unrest from going to the right of them or over them. Okay. Let's take a look at the basic gameplay of the game. And I think that's some dye, actually. I'm dyeing my hair, trying to look less gray. Okay. The base turn. So what's going to happen in the game is each player takes a turn and then just passes it around. This card is not defined to be passed with every play. It works well for me solo simply because I'm able to walk away more easily, after one player's gone or whatever. But normally what it's used for is only if an issue is being resolved, which is a complex procedure compared to what most turns are. So you wouldn't really pass it most of the time in a normal playing session. I'm going to do that. Okay. So a player at random is the first player in the game. Seating is not defined in the game. I assume you play clockwise, but it can have an impact on the game, a fairly heavy one. I'm using the same seating as I did in my game because I feel like US goes to Britain, goes to France, goes to Italy if you're looking on a map. But as far as I can tell, it should actually be completely randomized, because what happens is there are times when you have capabilities based on, who's in between you and the guy you're fighting with and stuff like that. So very much like an 18xx game, some of the effects in play might be determined by other players and their actions. Okay, anyway, let's get to it. The turn sequence. So on your player turn, you have to do one of three things as a mandatory action, and then you're a political action, and then you're allowed to do a military action if you wish. Now, the political action, you can place influence any number of cubes as far as I can tell, but on two issues that are either on the table or in the waiting room, okay? And you have to have the most influence after you place. You can up influence on an issue you're already winning, but you can't like slip an influence into something just to, you know, that you're not going to be ahead in. So you have to place cubes that'll allow you to win that'll put you in the leading position on two issues. Or you can go over here and grab up to 6 influence. You don't have to take 6, but you have to take at least 1 and all your military counters that are exhausted. There might be conditions where you don't want to take all your cubes out of there, so that you have the opportunity to take cubes out of there again on your next turn. And then the final option is to take one of the 2 on the table issues and settle it. You don't have to be in the lead to do this. You won't win the issue, but you can trigger something and thus give someone else that issue. Okay, placing influence cubes. Okay, went over that. Reclaiming influence in military, went through that. Settling an issue. Settling an issue is the complex thing. And over here on the player card, they tell you your options, and then the settling the issue list. And then on the other side, there's modifiers for the, well, there's how you handle an uprising check. Okay, just making sure, because again, I didn't use that. I used the rule book for the most part. When you settle an issue, the first thing you do is you resolve the issue. You can only settle an issue if there are cubes on it. The person with the most cubes on it, and remember, there will always be different numbers of cubes. Like everybody will have a different number of cubes on it, because you can only place if you're going to be in the lead. And there's nothing that fiddles the cubes around. So let's find it. You resolve the issue. The way you do that is the person with the most cubes, all his cubes will be exhausted. Every other player has half their cubes exhausted, and they get the other half. Except if you're not winning an issue that you resolve, you get all your cubes back. If you're the current player and you're not winning the issue, but you resolve it, you get all your cubes back and you're available. So it's a way to clear cubes off that maybe you overbid on. Well, put a bid on, but whatever. All right. The issue is then moved over, and you'll be getting this as the person, you know, who had the most cubes on it, and getting its victory points if you can hold on to it. That person then has to they have to choose one of the options on a card. And you can see, like this one has 3. Some of them have at least 4, but like this one only has 2. You choose that option. Now, if it has one of these icons on it for one of these counters, you take those counters. So for example, in this case, there's an industry icon. If I choose option A, the no, I'll get an industry marker. And that's going to affect other people's markers here. It may affect events in the game, etc. Then you see there's happiness effects on various players. And let's say Italy had the most cubes on this, spent them. They would cause, say, they would by taking this one, they would cause France to lose 2 happiness on the track and England to lose 1. Okay. The next thing you do is you go to the conference event that's in play. And this bottom text will be resolved. Who controls if it's resolved? Well, if somebody has a cube on it, they get to control whatever choices there are on it. Otherwise, the current player, the guy who has the active player card, gets to make all choices for it. The next thing is you move issues and events from the waiting room to the table. The active player gets to choose any one of these waiting room issues and promote it to the on the table issue. It might have cubes on it already, they all stay. They also get to pick one of these 2 events. This one will be gone because it just got used. They can push it up. If it has this, they have the option to take one of their available cubes and put it on the map, on the card. Okay. Then they get to, the active player again, same person who got to make this choice, gets to make a choice of whether or not they want to buy one of the cards from the discard pile, 0 for the first, 1 for the second, 2 for the third, by expending influence counters, or draw the top 2 cards, choose one to put in the waiting room, and put the other one on the discard pile. Cards could get buried so deep in the discard pile that they're never coming back. Or the discard pile could stay very low as people keep picking from it, because quite often it's more appealing to take that 0 card if it's not a bad card for you, if you like the card, and instead of drawing 2 cards, both of which may not be good for you. You're not allowed to choose a card from the discard once you see those 2 cards. And then you draw a random event card and you resolve the effect that's up here immediately. And it just takes effect immediately. Okay. But resolving the issue, that first step here, yeah, we went through that already. Okay. So the event card can cause unrest checks. It can cause other things that happen. If happiness, they say 30, the chart only goes to 25. I was having the chart top out at 30. I don't know, or at 25, but the rules say 30. So again, we found a place in the rules. The components don't really help with that. Not sure what happened there. I'll probably still have it top out at 25. It's not that big a deal. You're probably not going to, well, we had players hit the 25, and with this one, they're starting a little ahead, actually. And in the longest game, it starts at 24. All right. Some of these counters, so like this one would cause, once you resolved it, it would cause a reparations marker. That's what this symbol is. The U.S. would get a penalty to their happiness, but this would be an unrest marker, and you'd find Europe, and you'd move the unrest marker up 1, assuming it can move. Multiple unrest, remove an unrest. Let's hold off on the military actions. Need to recharge my battery, probably need to rinse my hair. Now, in addition to the issue influence on exhaust options, which you must take one of, you also may do a military action. And the military actions are either deploy or demobilize. Deploy lets you put a military counter into this track. Now, you're allowed to put it anywhere on 5, 6, 7, or 8, as long as no one else is there and you don't already have a military unit in that region. The regions being the horizontal lines. If you place it, okay, a military unit that's already deployed can be moved to a different space or to another region as a deployment function, but if you place it anywhere except column 8, you got to pay a price. So the price is listed up here. It comes in terms of influence points that you have to pay and happiness that you have to pay. Now, something about the counters for me, I put a little 2 on the other side of each of the counters, just drew it in with a Sharpie, because that's going to be helpful in the actual play of issues becoming uncontrolled and what happens there. Okay. Now, each of the columns has advantages to it. If you're in any of these columns, you will have a bid capability on an unrest issue, an uncontrolled issue, basically one that's gotten released due to the circumstances. But if you're in any of these 3, and obviously zone 7, column 7 is the cheapest, you also have the capability to add or subtract 1 to any unrest die rolls. The unrest die rolls being triggered by this. This is not a 7 or more though, so. And so you can increase or reduce the chance of unrest taking effect. It has another effect, which is that the unrest marker can't move into or beyond a military counter. So if you put it in this far column here, the deepest column, you can prevent unrest chances quite significantly. First of all, it makes the 5 or more the best die roll available for unrest. And secondly, if you wish, you could subtract 1 from the die roll, thus making it really hard. But you're only allowed to have 1 military unit on each region, and everybody who's in a given region occupies the space entirely. No one else can go into that same space. Now, when you demobilize a military unit, you can take an available, deployed, or exhausted counter, and you move it to the highest one of these boxes. In the 4-player game, these 2 boxes don't count. Everybody can go into this box once the others are all filled. And that'll be an amount of happiness that you get back for demobilizing. Once that unit's been demobilized, though, it's never coming back. It's out of the game. Now, mutiny, when the happiness track pushes you below one of these, and yeah, I mean, I've gone over this very lightly, then you may have too many military units compared to what's listed. 3 until you get to here, 2 for this span, 1 here, none. Normal demobilization rules are used for this, but the military piece must be placed in the 1 box, so you only get 1 happiness back for a mutiny. I wanted to check to see if you got it back, because I didn't think you did. All right, uprising checks, usually triggered, maybe always triggered, by these event cards, sometimes when they come up into here, sometimes when they're over the bottom part of it. Not really sure about that bottom part. None are showing, and I know that that's rarer. It's more often it just randomly happens. If an uprising check occurs, an issue aligned to that region can change control and or whatever option it has. This is one of the most complicated pieces of a game that's not that complicated, to be honest. Okay, first thing you have to do is determine which regions have to check for unrest. Now, that might be on the card itself. It might just say the Balkans checks for unrest. Or, if it doesn't say that, whichever regions are in the highest column are the ones that are going to be susceptible. And then you go from Europe going down to the Pacific, one after another, in all the regions that have that highest column occupied by the unrest marker. And you roll a die. If you get the number listed or higher, it causes an unrest, which will disassociate an issue, and it has to be dealt with. It gets bid on again, basically, outside of the normal mechanisms of the conference. There are the modifiers that I mentioned. If you have military, some of the cards have modifiers. Okay. You will do each region one at a time that has to check. Probably not going to be all of them. Okay. First, if a region goes into an uprising, then the player who has the most issues that are associated with that region. So, for example, this is for the Middle East. Now, note, there are issues that don't have a region. Reparations and League, for example, do not have a region. With the most issues is subject to the uprising. If there's no military in the region, the possibly affected players each roll a die, and the highest roller is subjected. Random check. Otherwise, whoever has a military unit furthest to the left in the region gets to choose which of the people with the most issues is affected. Most issues in that region. Okay, then that person who has been selected for the issue, and this is something that should be errata. The highest star value issue controlled by the selected player is the subject of the uprising and will be unsettled. If there's a tie, the chosen player decides which of their issues will be unsettled. What it's missing there is in the region. The playbook example, with a little bit of study, I was able to find that there was a situation where it was obvious that it was one from that region, from that specific region. But that's not specified in the rules. The rules as written actually would say that, like, let's say you had indemnities, that would end up being the issue that gets revisited. I saw some comments on BGG about it. Some people say it's clear. Everybody seems to agree that it's supposed to be from the region. Some people say this rule doesn't need any modification. It is obvious that it does. It is saying the wrong thing. But anyway, starting with the player who controls the issue and going clockwise, each player can pass, bid military or available influence cubes. Military units cannot be used on issues with a no military symbol. That's where I've got the, oh gosh, this is weird, right? It really makes it sound like indemnities could come up through a regional rebellion. I don't think that's the case because, again, it's not in the rule book or it's not in the playbook that way. But the rule book seems to be clear that it can, that it has nothing to do with the region that's actually in unrest. Now, here, though, it says only military that is either available or in the same region as the issue can be used. All the regional issues have their own military, have a military associated with them. They don't have these markers. So again, the rules all fit with, you can pick any, it will be the highest valued card that the player holds, not the highest valued in the region. If a player passes, they can't re-enter the bid. Okay, so what happens is the person who once owned the issue, who just lost control of it, can throw influence markers, so long as there's, you can bid so long as you are winning it, just like over here. But here's the thing. Influence markers are only tiebreakers in military issues. Militaries, the person with the most military wins the issue. And if the military comes from the region that the issue's in, it counts as 2 points on the bid instead of simply 1. And that's why these markers have 2, so that I can take them off the region and put them there as part of the bid. And note that it's worth 2 points instead of 1. That's why I marked those. Okay. Now, you can put a tied amount of military counters in place and more influence than the person you're trying to beat. And then you'll be in the lead again. Once everybody's dropped out of the bidding and one person is in the lead, they have now won the issue, and they resolve it again much in the same mechanism as before, which is to say they pick one of these 2 choices, or 3 or 4 or whatever, and affect it, and they get the issue on their in their tableau. Now again, the rules are absolutely, like, there's nothing that leads me in these rules to say that I couldn't have picked indemnities, or that I couldn't pick another region, or the only thing that, and in fact, if I had indemnities at 6 points, that probably is the issue that comes up due to the rebellion. There are ways of arguing that from a sort of historical point of view as well, which, so it doesn't seem like, for me, I played it as if it were by region, and then got to this rule and said, I'm playing it wrong. And then said, am I though? If there's unrest in the Middle East, if like the Middle East blows up, I can see the argument that maybe indemnities gets affected by it, but I'm not really sure that something in Europe would change borders as easily due to an unrest in the Middle East. So there's kind of a, I'm not really sure about this, which is why I went and looked in the playbook, found my answer there, but it wasn't a certain answer. Went and looked on BGG, and everybody seems to agree that it's supposed to be by region. So that's how I'm going to play it. It's not really that huge a difference if you screw it up, but it makes things like the league issues and the reparations issues, all the non-military stuff, more likely. So why is that comment there about not needing it for about the military issue, about the issues that have a no military marker in there, if that can't be selected? Because the same procedure is used and is not repeated in the rules for events that allow you to throw those issues into play. But yeah, one person's comment was, the rules as written are absolutely clear that it, has to be in the same region. I disagree entirely. I see nothing here that indicates that. Anyway, then reset region unrest, increase the powder keg level in the region by 1. Now, what is the region, right? If you're looking at it where it's just the highest valued card that the player holds, is it the region that the issue was thrown into, or the region that initially triggered this? Well, that's one hint that maybe these rules are not written correctly, right? But anyway, what happens is the powder keg moves up 1. That might push this thing around. The unrest marker is then going to be put directly to the right of the issue. Now, timing is important here. The issue option has not yet been selected. That happens now, which might affect the unrest and drive it up above that space next to the powder keg. On the first uprising, and I think that's successful uprising, each player must declare which strategy card they're choosing out of this selection. Now, that selection is different in each game because that's a set of things. Now we have an example here. The Smyrna issue is being settled. The last step would be to add the top card to the event in the event deck to the waiting room and resolve the crisis portion. It's Belliclude. There's a crisis in the upright check because maybe it handles it here. Determine regions, Europe and Middle East are tied, blah, blah, blah. Determine unsettled issue. The UK controls 2 Middle East issues, France 1 and USA none. Thus, the UK is subject to the uprising, fine. The UK has Constantinople and Arabia. These are both Middle East cards. However, it's not saying that the 6 point, maybe that's the only 2 cards they have, right? If both controlled 2 Middle East issues, the player with the military furthest decides. In this case, it's the UK, so they will decide. If there was no military at all in the region, the UK and France would roll up. Let me swap batteries. The reason I'm diving into this is because I didn't read this example, so maybe it tells me. It does not. Because then it goes to the bid for control. Constantinople is subject to the uprising, and then they can throw their bids as explained, and then you reset the region unrest and select the issue option. Okay. Yeah. The only place that I could find anything, like there's sort of a hint here with the UK controls 2 Middle East issues, France 1 and the USA none. Okay. That's who's subject. That's fine. The UK has Constantinople and Arabia, so Constantinople is the unsettled. Yeah. But it doesn't mention non-Middle East issues at all. So UK could just have those 2 issues, right? They don't. It doesn't clarify this one case, which is the real problem, which is this rule right here. The highest star value issue controlled by the selected player, not in the region, is subject to the uprising. And then the one thing that really reflects badly on this is that, on this theory, is that there's further rules about, the no military issue being possible under this. If you read this through, it feels very much like it's just the highest valued card you have, not the highest valued in the region. Anyway, after you resolve, the first of the unrest checks, you go to the next one and see if that unleashes anything. Remember, the highest column that the unrest marker is in, every region of that might go over depending on the cards. All right, strategy cards. Strategy cards. During setup, a number of them were dealt out. At the conclusion of the first uprising, there was somewhere where there's something special about that first uprising. Because maybe I have something wrong. Might be the first uprising check, but I don't think so. I think it's the first successful uprising. I remember there being a note about this. But we'll keep going, I guess. Each player calculates the number of star values they have in controlled issues. Strategy counters or happiness don't count for this calculation. Yeah, because they're not stars. Just these numbers count. Whoever has the lowest star value total selects a strategy card and marks it with their national marker. Yeah. So that is what these things are for. I just move them over next to the player. I think that's easier. Then, if there's a tie, the player closest to the current active player picks first. The active player would therefore always win this tie. The player with the next lowest star rate, nice clarification there, right? Why isn't there that clarification? I mean, this is, Mark Herman is usually really, really good at nailing down rules. And it's one of the reasons why I looked at that and just said, I looked at it and said, I'm playing it wrong by not allowing the indemnities to be caused, to be thrown into question by an uprising, by not making it just the highest card value. Okay, anyway. I mean, I've really hammered on this, but that rule is just absolutely written wrong, or else the playbook example, which is much less clear to find, is wrong, and all the players are wrong who've commented on it. And maybe some who are involved in the design, in the playtesting and whatever. By the way, that's another cool thing. Somebody was mentioning, one thing we're missing here is a developer. 2 designers, no developer. It's still not sufficient, but we have a nice list of playtesters, many of which I know by name, if nothing else, as people I've dealt with. Just kind of cool. Anyway. Always something I check. Where are we? Yeah. The player with the next lowest star total chooses the next one and places their national marker on it. And this continues until everybody has picked one of the strategy cards. There'll be an extra one. There's one more than there are a number of players every time. And that one just gets discarded from play. Negotiations. This is the rule that really, really pleased me. Negotiation decisions are public and binding, but only for the immediate transaction. So players are free to negotiate deals, but they can't directly exchange any game materials. They can agree to settle an issue if the winner selects a specific option. That will be binding. Any deal conditions that will be performed during that player turn are absolutely binding. But any condition beyond that player turn is not binding. So you can make future promises, they don't mean anything. I really think this is really well described in a way that most games don't manage so parsimoniously. Any condition that apply for future turns are not, all right. As part of any deal and at any time, a player may move up to 6 influence from available to exhausted to allow another player to withdraw an equal number. You basically can give influence to another player by doing that. Okay. At a certain number of cards from the bottom of the deck, in this case 10, base game 20, there is the game end rush to finish card, which is sort of an indication of people were getting very tired of the negotiations and everything and tried to flush everything out at the end. Now, there's 2 ways the game can end. When the game end rush to finish issue is settled, and it's just a normal issue with no options. It's worth 7 points, which is pretty potent. Or if a player wishes to take issues from the draw deck and there are none available, none, not 2, not 1. So if you choose to draw and there's only 1 available, you get that one, I guess. The game ends and final scores are determined. Okay. When the rush to finish issue is settled. Okay. Here's the deal. It goes into the waiting room like a normal issue. People can put cubes on it and handle it as normal. But once it's settled, the player who has the majority of influence on it takes the issue, it's worth 7 points, and the game ends immediately, and you don't finish up the process of dealing with one of these cards, of promoting cards, of flipping a card which could cause unrest, all of that shit. None of that happens. The game just ends as soon as somebody settles that issue. Which means if you're in the lead, you want to get that issue settled. And you might even be willing to settle it in someone else's hands if they're going to be below you in victory points. But victory points are complex. And I think it's important not to recalculate them all. Although, honestly, only at the very end of the game would you be constantly calculating victory points. You can get a pretty good feel for what they have otherwise. Here's the final scoring. Let's get this sheet out, because this will help. All right. You're going to get points for the controlled issues you have. Just add up all these points. That goes here in that first space. Strategy tokens. If your flag is on an issue that you have settled, now not all the strategy tokens have your flag on them. Naval and Empire do. Those are the only ones. So if you have an issue in your tableau that has your flag on it, you will get 1 point per those flags. Strategy cards themselves, you get to calculate the points for these 4 different categories. Now here, this says per factory thing, per industrialization. You will get 2 points for every industrialization, not that you control, but that has happened throughout the board. So sometimes you might be willing to promote something and cut a deal or whatever based on the choice. Or you might look at it and just say, that player is going to do X, right? It's in their advantage. But it would be best to get the agreement, you know? Hey, US, you don't want the unhappiness. You control indemnities right now. How about you pick the no option on reparations? Let's say it's Italy or whatever, or somebody who has this factory and really wants it. Maybe Britain has it and they're willing to take the unhappiness for it. And then we'll be okay with that, right? You know, I will choose this as the issue I will settle if you take option no, and you know the U.S. then commits to that, and they're forced to do it because it's in the same action, or they can refuse, and then it's still up to that other player to make the decision whether or not they want to settle it anyway. Okay, so strategy token, strategy card, all those different effects get added up. And finally, the national happiness. And if you look at these, the strategy card, all 4 conditions are here, and then there's a total space, whatever, I don't know. National happiness, whoever has the highest happiness gets the highest value, second highest, third highest, whatever, and depending on the number of players. If you have this modifier, you get twice the number of victory points for being happy. Person with the most victory points wins. If you're at 0 happiness, you take a special -5 bonus. I don't think that gets doubled, but you're in pretty bad shape at that point. If there's a tie in the game, whoever has highest national happiness wins. If they're still tied, then whoever has the most issues in number, not in victory points, wins. And if there's still a tie after that, those players just won together. Fuck it. There's a set of 2-player rules. The US, you play the 3-player game where Italy isn't really in the game, although they do have a happiness track, and Japan has a happiness track as well. And Japan is not in the game. They, however, are impacted by choices the players make. And people might be interested because they might want to make sure Italy or Japan does not sign the treaty. And then there's a solitaire rules, which has a more robust bot rule to it, and all kind of complexity to it. I did not read any of these. And that's pretty much it. The playbook itself, since we went through all the other components, let's go through the playbook. Let's talk about the die first. It's an interesting die. It doesn't go with any of my other dice. This will stay in the game just because I don't feel like that die belongs in my pile of loose dice. Normal size. So we've got a huge comprehensive example of play. This is the one place where I was able to find an example that supports reading the rules incorrectly, and it has to do with it's not the first time that there's an unrest. Try to see where it is. I don't know. I found some place where there's an unrest, but if you follow the whole sequence, Britain has issues from other areas that have higher value, and the issue that's chosen is from the region that's in unrest. And it's fairly late in the sequence. They give an example of the scoring. They give an example of the solo game. Commentary on the cards. The issue cards don't have any historical notes on them. That makes them cleaner and easier to see. I'm okay with that. These guys all have a little bit of note on them, which helps a little, I guess. But these give you some information on that. What there isn't is a history of the actual negotiations. And the design notes were relatively funky. They felt more like the personal discovery of the game design, and where maybe they had troubles and everything. I like my design notes to dig into why a particular choice was made, and Herman goes a little bit more on that. Engelstein goes much more about what he's dealing with. They talk about things like the biggest problem child during development was always the unrest in military systems. We tried and discarded what feels like dozens of systems. Yeah, that's not really helpful, right? Like, I don't know, again, it's like my personal history shit when I do my videos. Okay, it's interesting to read and everything, but I didn't feel like I learned anything about why the choices were made, except that, yeah, it was hard to do it the other ways we thought about. One thing that was kind of interesting was the original design that Engelstein had, and apparently both he and Herman were working on this topic, and just happened to find out that they were doing that. Through a chance encounter, and decided to work together on it. But Engelstein had like a map with different, like being able to change the borders and everything. That's a very complex thing to handle. Works best if you can draw. Like, it just happens to be the best way to handle things. Yeah, I had a lot of fun the first time I played it. Again, I'm a little worried that maybe the game is going to be too long and is going to overstay its welcome with only 10 cards, issue cards, hidden below. But I also felt a little bit of, gosh, I want more of the issues that were resolved to come out. Sure, some issues get buried in here. That's all player choice. The 10 issues at the bottom give sufficient issues that after that race to the finish card comes out, there's still room to keep playing and avoiding finishing the negotiations. So I thought that was kind of cool too. I think that the most extreme version of the game, take 5 cards, shuffle that card in there, that could be the last card in the deck. And then there's not a lot of room to play with. Yeah, there's discards. You can buy out of the discards if you don't want to, if you keep not promoting the race to the finish. But it just felt like it would be too restrictive, and I'm okay with some issues never coming to the table. But I felt like 20 issues in that bottom pile means that probably 15 of them don't come to the table, and there aren't all that many issues. If we take a look at the, we have 53 issues total. So 20 of them under there, you know, means 40% of the deck doesn't not get played. Like, it's not out of play. In fact, you could go through all 20 of those issues if nobody wanted to finish the game, but somebody's going to have an advantage to trying to trigger the end of the game. All right, we'll get to playing. Let's see what fun we can have.